The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed in cream parchment that smelled faintly of lavender and lies. Lydia Ashcroft didn't tremble when she broke the wax. She'd stopped trembling years ago. Inside, another woman's handwriting curled across the page like smoke. He speaks of you sometimes, when the guilt catches him. But it passes. It always passes. 3 lines, 24 words. The complete dismantling of a marriage built on duty, distance, and the slow suffocation of hope. Lydia folded the letter once, twice, set it beside her cold tea. Across the frost-cracked estate her husband had abandoned for politics and other pursuits. The children were already awake, the servants already working, the land already demanding. And she was already alone. This is the story of what happens when a woman stops asking to be seen and starts making sure everyone else finally opens their damn eyes. Drop a comment with your city below. I want to know how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The window in Lydia's study faced north, which meant it caught no sun even at midday. She preferred it that way. Light had a way of exposing things, dust in the corners, cracks in the plaster, the fine lines that had begun to appear at the edges of her mouth like fault lines in stone. At 32, she looked older when she smiled, which she did rarely, and younger when she didn't, which was most of the time. She sat now in the chair her husband's grandfather had commissioned, high-backed, uncomfortable, designed to remind whoever sat in it that comfort was a luxury reserved for those who'd earned it. Rowan had never sat in it. Rowan preferred the leather wingback in the parlor, the one that faced the fire and required nothing of him but to exist and be admired. The estate ledger lay open before her. Grain stores, livestock losses, tenant payments overdue because the winter had been brutal and Lydia wasn't a monster, despite what efficiency required. She made a note in the margin. Extend Miller family to spring. 2 children under 5. Her handwriting was smaller than it used to be, tighter, as if even her penmanship had learned to take up less space. Mother? She didn't look up. Breakfast is at 8, Thomas. You know this. It's 7:30. Then you're early. She dipped her pen. State your business. A pause. Thomas was 9, old enough to understand that his mother's attention was a commodity dispensed in careful measure, never freely given. I wanted to ask about Father. The pen stopped. Lydia set it down with deliberate care, aligning it parallel to the ledger's edge. Only then did she look at her son. He stood in the doorway in his nightshirt, bare feet on the cold floor, hair sticking up on one side. He had Rowan's eyes, that particular shade of gray that looked thoughtful, even when empty. What about him? When is he coming home? The question was delivered without inflection, a simple request for information. But Lydia heard what lay beneath it, the same question she'd stopped asking herself 2 years ago, when absence became the permanent condition rather than the temporary inconvenience. I don't know. Thomas absorbed this with a small nod, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. Will he come for my birthday? I don't know that either. Oh. He shifted his weight. Cook asked what kind of cake to make. Should I pick? Yes. Father liked the chocolate one last time. Your father, Lydia said carefully, isn't here. Choose what you like. Thomas nodded again. The small motion contained more resignation than any 9-year-old should possess. He turned to go, then stopped. Mother? Do you miss him? The question arrived like a blade between ribs. Quick, precise, unexpected. Lydia had armor for most things. She'd built it piece by piece over years of managing an estate that would have broken softer women, of raising children who learned early that tears accomplished nothing, of maintaining the fiction that her marriage was merely distant rather than disintegrated. But this question found the gap. Get dressed, she said. Lessons start at 9. Thomas left without another word. He'd learned that lesson too. When his mother didn't answer, the answer was too complicated for the truth. Lydia returned to the ledger, but the numbers swam. She closed her eyes and counted to 10, an old habit from the early days of her marriage, when Rowan's absences had still felt temporary, when she'd still believed that managing everything alone was a short-term sacrifice rather than a permanent arrangement. The letter sat where she'd left it, folded into a small square that could be easily hidden or easily burned. She'd done neither. The woman who'd written it was named Catherine Delacroix. Though whether that was her married name or maiden name or complete fabrication, Lydia neither knew nor particularly cared. What mattered was that Catherine had access to Rowan's private thoughts, his guilty moments, his confessions. Catherine knew things about Lydia's husband that Lydia herself had stopped trying to learn. He speaks of you sometimes when the guilt catches him. The phrase suggested intimacy, not necessarily the physical kind, though Lydia wasn't naive enough to rule it out, but the deeper kind. The kind where a man revealed the parts of himself he kept hidden from the woman who bore his children and managed his legacy and asked for nothing except the bare minimum of his presence. But it passes. It always passes. That was the knife twist. Not the betrayal itself, but the casual dismissal of it. The acknowledgement that whatever guilt Rowan felt about abandoning his family was temporary, manageable, ultimately inconsequential. A brief discomfort, like a stone in one's shoe, easily shaken out and forgotten. Lydia had read the letter 17 times since its arrival 4 days ago. She'd memorized every loop of Catherine's handwriting, every careful word choice. The letter wasn't meant to inform, it was meant to wound. Catherine wanted Lydia to know she was replaceable, forgettable, a duty completed rather than a person cherished. The truly remarkable thing was how little it had surprised her. She opened the ledger again, found her place, continued her calculations. The estate needed 60 bushels of seed grain for spring planting. The north pasture fence required replacement before the livestock could be rotated. The Miller family needed an extension on their rent, and the Thorntons would likely need the same. And if she was being honest, the Carvers too, though they'd never admit it because pride was the one commodity that cost nothing and paid nothing. This was her life, had been for years, would be for years more. Rowan had left for the capital 6 years ago. Temporary, he'd said. The Duke must maintain his political presence. 6 months, perhaps a year. That year had stretched into 2, then 3. His visits home became irregular, brief, marked by awkward dinners where he asked about the children as if they were distant acquaintances he felt obliged to remember. He'd admire the estate's prosperity, the healthy crops, the well-maintained buildings, the growing coffers, without ever asking how that prosperity was achieved or at what cost. He'd leave again, and Lydia would return to the work. Always the work. She'd stopped resenting it around year 4. Resentment required energy she didn't have. Instead, she'd developed something colder and more sustainable. Indifference fortified by competence. She didn't need Rowan to run the estate. She'd proven that conclusively. What she needed was for him to admit it, but he never did. In his letters, increasingly rare, increasingly brief, he referred to himself as managing family affairs from the capital, as if his political maneuvering and whatever he did with women like Catherine Delacroix constituted family management. As if Lydia's actual labor was merely the execution of his vision rather than the entirety of their survival. The breakfast bell rang. Lydia closed the ledger, straightened her skirts, and walked downstairs with the posture that had become second nature. Spine straight, chin level, expression neutral. The armor of competence, worn so long she sometimes forgot it wasn't her actual skin. The children were already seated, Thomas in his proper place, napkin in lap, waiting. Clara, 6 years old, swinging her feet under the table with the restless energy of someone who hadn't yet learned that stillness was safer than movement. "Good morning, Mother," Clara announced, as if breakfast was a surprise rather than a daily occurrence. "Good morning." Lydia took her seat at the head of the table. Hands. Both children presented their hands for inspection. Clean. They'd learned that lesson early, too. The cook brought out porridge, bread, jam. Simple food, well prepared. Lydia had dismissed the French chef Rowan had hired during one of his brief visits home. The man had created elaborate dishes no one ate and complained constantly about the provincial quality of frontier ingredients. His replacement was a local woman who understood that food's purpose was nutrition, not performance. "Thomas has been asking about his birthday cake," Lydia said. Clara's feet stopped swinging. "Is Father coming home?" "No." "Oh." Clara picked up her spoon, set it down, picked it up again. "Will he send a present?" "I don't know." "He sent me a doll last year," Clara said, her voice taking on the careful brightness that meant she was trying to convince herself of something. "A very nice doll, with a china face." "Yes. I named her Margaret, after the princess in the story. I remember." She's in my room. Do you want to see her? I've seen her, Clara. But not recently. She has a new dress now. Cook helped me sew it. Lydia looked at her daughter, small, hopeful, trying so hard to fill the silence with chatter because silence in this house meant thinking about things no 6-year-old should have to think about. After lessons, Lydia said. You may show me after lessons. Clara beamed. It took so little to please her. A few minutes of attention, a scrap of interest, things that should have been abundant but had become rare enough to treasure. Thomas ate in silence, methodically working through his porridge. He never asked for things, never pushed. He'd learned even earlier than Clara that disappointment was easier to manage if you never allowed yourself expectation. Lydia wondered, not for the first time, what kind of people her children would become, whether they'd remember these years as character building or character breaking, whether they'd thank her for teaching them self-sufficiency or resent her for never being soft. She wondered if it mattered. Softness was a luxury, like sunshine in the north-facing window. Nice if you could afford it. Deadly if you counted on it. Thomas, she said, after lessons, you'll accompany me to inspect the north fence. His head came up. Yes, Mother. Bring your notebook. I want you to learn how to assess repair costs. Something shifted in his expression, not quite pleasure, but something adjacent to it. Purpose, maybe, or the relief of being needed. Clara, you'll work with Miss Brennan on your letters. But I wanted to. Letters, Clara. The brightness dimmed. Clara returned to her porridge, feet swinging again but slower now, the enthusiasm carefully packed away. This was what Lydia had become. A woman who prioritized function over feeling, who measured success in grain yields and balanced ledgers, who loved her children in the same way she loved the estate, fiercely, protectively, from a distance that ensured survival. She hadn't always been this way. Once, she'd been someone else, someone who laughed easily and trusted freely and believed that love was something you could count on rather than something that evaporated when tested. That woman had died slowly, over years, as Rowan's absences accumulated and her responsibilities multiplied, and the gap between who she'd thought she'd married and who she'd actually married became too wide to pretend away. The current Lydia was what remained, harder, colder, infinitely more capable, and infinitely more alone. After breakfast, she returned to her study. The morning's work awaited, correspondence with the grain merchant, a dispute between tenants over water rights, a request from the village for funds to repair the church roof. Each item required attention, decision, action. Each one would have been Rowan's responsibility if he'd been here. But he wasn't here. He was in the capital, attending salons and parliamentary sessions, and conducting whatever relationship he had with Catherine Delacroix. He was being the Duke, the political force, the man of influence and importance, while Lydia was being everything else. She worked until noon, then walked the property with Thomas. The north fence was in worse condition than she'd hoped. 3 sections completely collapsed, 2 more leaning dangerously. Repairing it would require lumber, labor, time, all things that cost money the estate had but would feel. Thomas took notes, his handwriting uncertain but improving. He asked good questions. Why this wood rather than that? Why repair now rather than wait until spring? Why rotate livestock at all if it meant this much work? Lydia answered each one, watching him absorb the information with the same quiet focus he brought to everything. He would make a good duke someday, she thought. Better than his father, probably, because he was learning early that authority meant responsibility, not just privilege. If Rowan ever bothered to come home long enough to teach him anything, Thomas might learn other lessons too. How to be charming, how to navigate social complexities, how to make people believe you were indispensable while doing the bare minimum to prove it. But Rowan wasn't here, so Thomas would learn what Lydia could teach him: how to work, how to think, how to survive without needing anyone. It would have to be enough. They returned to the house as the sun, what little of it penetrated the perpetual gray of frontier winters, began its early descent. Clara met them at the door, holding Margaret the doll with its new dress, desperate to show off her afternoon's work. Lydia examined the dress. The stitching was uneven, the hem crooked, but Clara had done it herself with minimal help. For a 6-year-old, it was impressive. Very nice, Lydia said. Clara glowed. Do you really think so? I do. Can I make another one? Cook said she has more fabric scraps. After you finished your letters with Miss Brennan. I did finish. Look! Clara produced a slate with several wobbly letters. I wrote my name and Thomas's name and your name and Father's? Thomas asked quietly. Clara's enthusiasm dimmed. I forgot. You didn't forget, Thomas said. It wasn't accusatory, just factual. You ran out of space. Clara looked at the slate, then at her mother, then at the floor. I can write it now if you want. It's fine, Clara, Lydia said. You've done well. Go put Margaret in your room and wash up for dinner. Clara fled, grateful for the dismissal. Thomas remained studying his mother with those two old eyes. She doesn't remember him very well, does she? She was 3 when he left for the capital. She pretends, though, about the doll, about him sending presents. He paused. The doll was from you, wasn't it? Lydia had ordered it from a merchant catalog, had it shipped from the capital, had forged Rowan's signature on the card. She'd done the same for Thomas's birthday gifts, for Christmas presents, for every occasion that required a father's acknowledgement. Does it matter who it was from? Thomas considered this. I suppose not. She's happy either way. Then perhaps the truth is less important than the kindness. Is that what you believe? The question was too complex, too pointed. Lydia looked at her son and saw someone she hadn't quite noticed growing, a person forming his own thoughts, testing his own conclusions, no longer simply accepting what he was told. I believe, she said carefully, that we do what's necessary to protect the people we love, even if that means complicating the truth, like pretending Father cares when he doesn't. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples Lydia couldn't quite control. Your father cares, Thomas. He's simply absent. The word you're looking for is absent. Thomas's voice was flat, eerily adult. It's all right, Mother. I'm not a child anymore. You don't have to protect me from obvious things. You're 9 years old, and I've been 9 years old in this house long enough to understand how it works. He shifted his notebook to his other hand. You manage everything. You make all the decisions. You're the one who's actually here. Father is somewhere else, being important to other people. That's the truth, isn't it? Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to defend Rowan, to explain that political service mattered, that his work in the capital served the family, even if indirectly, that absence didn't equal abandonment. But the words wouldn't come, because Thomas was right, and lying to him would be both insulting and pointless. Yes, she said. That's the truth. Thomas nodded once, a small gesture of vindication. Thank you for not pretending. He walked away, leaving Lydia standing in the hallway with the uncomfortable realization that her son had stopped being a child sometime when she wasn't looking. Rowan had missed that transition entirely, had missed so much, was still missing it. She returned to her study, to the letter that waited there like a living thing, patient and venomous. He speaks of you sometimes, when the guilt catches him. But it passes. It always passes. For 6 years, Lydia had managed her anger the same way she managed everything else, by containing it, controlling it, converting it into productive action. She'd channeled her frustration into estate improvements, her loneliness into efficient routines, her hurt into the hard shell that protected her from needing anything Rowan couldn't or wouldn't provide. But this letter, this casual cruelty from a woman who knew just enough to wound, had done something unexpected. It had clarified things, stripped away the last pretense. Rowan didn't just neglect his family. He felt guilty about it, acknowledged it privately to another woman, then dismissed that guilt as inconvenient and moved on. He knew what he was doing. He simply didn't care enough to stop. That realization settled over Lydia like the first snow of winter, cold, inevitable, transforming the landscape into something harder and less forgiving. She'd spent 6 years being patient, being capable, being the wife who asked for nothing and received exactly that. She'd built a life that functioned perfectly without him, had raised children who barely knew him, had created prosperity. He could claim credit for from 200 miles away, and he'd taken all of it for granted, had assumed it would simply continue, had never once considered that Lydia might stop accepting the unacceptable. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, dipped her pen, began to write. Not a confrontation, not an accusation. Those required emotion, and emotion could be dismissed, explained away, turned into evidence of feminine weakness. Instead, she wrote a record A meticulous, detailed accounting of the last 6 years. Every crisis she'd navigated, every decision she'd made, every responsibility she'd shouldered, every night she'd spent alone wondering if her children's father would even recognize them if they passed him on the street. She wrote for 3 hours straight, filling page after page with careful documentation. The winter Thomas had pneumonia and nearly died while Rowan was attending a hunting party in the capital. The flood that destroyed the South Fields and required complete replanting. The tenant uprising over new tax assessments that Lydia had negotiated down from violence to grudging acceptance. The 1,000 small crises. The daily decisions. The endless invisible labor of keeping everything running while everyone assumed it ran itself. She didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate, simply stated what had happened, what she'd done, what the outcome had been. Let the facts speak for themselves. By the time she finished, her hand ached and the candles had burned low. She read through what she'd written, checking for errors, for places where emotion had crept in. Found none. The letter was clinical, precise, devastating in its clarity. It would destroy him. Not immediately, not obviously, but it would plant a seed of doubt that would grow, slowly, inevitably, until he could no longer avoid seeing what he'd been deliberately not seeing for years. The question was what to do with it. She could send it to him directly, private, contained, a confrontation between husband and wife, or she could do something else entirely, something that would make ignoring it impossible. Lydia folded the letter, sealed it, addressed it. But not to Rowan, to his closest political ally, a man who admired Rowan's dedication to family values and frequently cited it in parliamentary speeches, a man whose support Rowan needed for his next political appointment. Let that man read about the reality behind the performance. Let him see what dedication to family actually looked like when measured in sleepless nights and solved crises and children who'd learned to stop asking when their father was coming home. Let the truth spread the way lies did, quickly, thoroughly, impossible to contain. Lydia sealed the letter with her personal seal. Not the ducal crest, which was Rowan's to use, but her own mark. A small act of claiming what was hers, her work, her story, her truth. Tomorrow she'd send it. Tonight, she'd sleep. For the first time in 6 years, she'd sleep soundly. Because for the first time in 6 years, she'd stopped waiting for Rowan to see her. She was going to make him see her, whether he wanted to or not. And there would be no passing guilt this time. No temporary discomfort easily shaken off. This time, the reckoning would be permanent. The courier left at dawn with 2 letters, one addressed to Lord Pemberton, Rowan's political sponsor, the other to Lady Margaret Huxley, who hosted the capital's most influential salon and had a reputation for gossip that spread faster than cholera in summer. Lydia watched the rider disappear into the gray morning, then returned inside and began the day's work as if nothing had changed. Because nothing had, not yet. The estate still needed managing. The children still needed raising. The north fence still required repair. The difference was that now, somewhere between here and the capital, the truth was traveling, moving through the world like a fever. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. She gave it 3 weeks. It took 2. The first response came from Lady Huxley, a brief note written in elaborate script that suggested too much time and too little purpose. My dear Duchess, what a revelation your letter has been. One hardly knows what to say. Though, of course, everyone is saying quite a lot. Do write again when you have time. Your candor is refreshing in ways I cannot adequately express. Lydia burned the letter without responding. She didn't need Lady Huxley's friendship. She needed her mouth, which was already working exactly as intended. The second response was longer. Lord Pemberton's secretary had written it, which told Lydia everything about how seriously he was taking the matter. The language was careful, diplomatic, deeply concerned. His lordship wishes to convey his utmost respect for your situation and his commitment to ensuring that family matters receive appropriate attention. He has requested a private audience with the Duke to discuss matters of mutual concern. Translation. Rowan was about to get a conversation he couldn't avoid. Lydia filed the letter in her desk drawer and went to inspect the grain stores. She didn't hear from Rowan for another week. When his letter finally arrived, delivered by special courier at significant expense, she almost laughed at the seal, pressed so hard into the wax it had nearly cracked. As if the force of it could convey what words apparently couldn't. She opened it in her study, alone, with a cup of tea that had gone cold while she worked through the quarterly accounts. "Lydia, I have received several disturbing communications regarding a letter you apparently wrote and distributed among my colleagues and associates. I confess myself utterly baffled by your decision to air private family matters in such a public forum. Whatever grievances you may have, and I acknowledge that my absences have perhaps been longer than ideal, surely they could have been addressed through direct conversation rather than this extraordinary breach of discretion. Lord Pemberton has expressed concerns about my ability to manage household affairs while serving in my political capacity. Lady Huxley's salon has apparently become a venue for speculation about our marriage that reflects poorly on both of us. I'm told that several members of Parliament have made pointed remarks about modern wives and uncontrolled correspondence. I cannot fathom what possessed you to take such drastic action. If you required my attention, you had only to ask. Instead, you have created a situation that threatens my standing in circles that took years to cultivate. The damage may well be irreparable. I will return to the estate within the month to discuss this matter in person. Until then, I trust you will refrain from any further communications that might exacerbate an already difficult situation. Your husband, Rowan." Lydia read it twice, set it down, picked up her tea, remembered it was cold, set it down again. "Mother?" She looked up. Clara stood in the doorway, holding Margaret, the doll's new dress already showing signs of wear. "Yes?" "Miss Brennan says I've finished my letters for today. May I go outside?" "It's freezing outside." "I'll wear my coat and my mittens and my hat." "The ground is frozen solid. There's nothing to do out there." "I could slide on this pond. Thomas said the ice is thick enough." "Thomas is not in charge of determining ice safety." Clara's face fell. "So I can't go?" Lydia almost said no. Almost sent Clara back to her room to find some quiet indoor activity that wouldn't risk pneumonia or broken bones or any of the thousand dangers that lurked in frontier winters. But Rowan's letter sat there on the desk, reeking of self-righteous indignation and complete obliviousness, and something in Lydia snapped. "Go," she said. "Take Thomas with you. Stay together. If the ice cracks, get off immediately." Clara's smile could have melted the pond. "Thank you, Mother." She ran off before Lydia could change her mind, and within minutes Lydia could hear both children bundling up, their voices carrying through the house with the kind of excitement that had become rare. Lydia returned to Rowan's letter. Read it a third time. "If you required my attention, you had only to ask." The audacity of that sentence was almost impressive, as if Lydia hadn't been asking for 6 years, as if every unanswered letter, every brief visit, every birthday missed, and crisis navigated alone wasn't a form of asking that Rowan had simply chosen not to hear. "I trust you will refrain from any further communications that might exacerbate an already difficult situation." Trust. An interesting word choice. Trust implied a foundation of mutual reliance, of proven dependability. Rowan trusted her to refrain from embarrassing him further, trusted her to manage the estate, raise the children, maintain the fiction that their marriage was functional. He'd always trusted her to do the work while he took the credit. She folded the letter and tucked it into her desk drawer with the others. Then she pulled out fresh paper and began to write again. Not to Rowan. She was done writing to Rowan. Instead, she wrote to the estate's tenants, all 43 families, a brief notice informing them that the spring rent assessment would be postponed until she could personally review each family's circumstances, that any necessary repairs to tenant housing would be prioritized before cosmetic improvements to the main house, that she was establishing a fund to assist families facing hardship due to illness, injury, or crop failure. It was Rowan's money she was spending, or rather the estate's money, which Rowan considered his by right despite contributing nothing to its generation. Let him complain about that when he arrived. Let him explain to 43 families why their Duchess's generosity needed to be revoked. She finished the notices by evening, had them copied and distributed the next day. By week's end, every tenant family had received one, and the response was immediate. 3 families who'd been preparing to leave for better opportunities elsewhere decided to stay. The Millers sent a basket of preserves with a note that made Lydia's eyes sting in a way she refused to acknowledge as tears. The blacksmith, a gruff man who'd barely spoken to her in 6 years, stopped her on the road to say, "Your Grace, there's not many would do right by us like this. We won't forget it. Ishamash." Lydia accepted the gratitude with the same neutral expression she brought to everything else. But privately, late at night when the house was quiet and the children asleep, she felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness exactly, but satisfaction. The sharp-edged kind that came from watching people recognize what she'd been doing all along. She'd been protecting them, providing for them, building something sustainable while Rowan built his political career on the foundation she maintained. Now they knew it, and soon everyone would. The third week brought a letter from Rowan's mother, the Dowager Duchess, a woman Lydia had met exactly twice and liked exactly never. The tone was brittle with barely controlled fury. "My dear Lydia, I've been made aware of your recent correspondence and its unfortunate circulation among our family's associates. While I understand that managing an estate during your husband's necessary absence must be challenging, I cannot condone the manner in which you have chosen to express your frustrations. A wife's role is to support her husband's endeavors with grace and discretion. Public displays of discontent serve no one and damage the family reputation that took generations to build. Whatever your personal grievances, they pale in comparison to the duty you owe to the family name. I trust you will consider this counsel in the spirit it is intended, as guidance from someone who has successfully navigated the complexities of noble marriage for far longer than you have been alive. The Dowager Duchess Ashcroft." Lydia read it once, then fed it directly into the fire without responding. The Dowager Duchess had spent 40 years married to a man who kept 3 mistresses and gambled away half the family fortune. Her expertise in successful marriage navigation was not something Lydia needed, but the letter confirmed something important. The story had spread beyond Rowan's immediate political circle. It was reaching family, extended networks, the broader social structure that determined reputation and standing. Good. She wanted everyone to know. Wanted the truth documented and distributed and impossible to ignore. Rowan thought she'd embarrassed him accidentally, out of emotional overflow or feminine hysteria. He didn't understand yet that this was calculated, precise. A surgical strike against the fiction he'd been selling for 6 years. The children noticed the increased correspondence, the letters arriving and departing with unusual frequency. "Is something wrong?" Thomas asked one morning, watching another courier ride off toward the capital. "No? Then why are so many people writing to you?" "They're not writing to me, they're writing about your father." Thomas frowned. "Is he in trouble?" "That depends on your definition of trouble." "Mother." He used his serious voice, the one that made him sound 40 instead of 9. "What's happening?" Lydia considered how much to tell him. He was old enough to understand the basics, young enough that the complexity might damage something she couldn't repair. "Your father," she said carefully, "has been living a life in the capital that doesn't reflect the reality here. I've corrected that misperception." "By telling people the truth?" "Yes." "And he's angry about it?" "Very." Thomas thought about this. Good. The word was delivered with such quiet conviction that Lydia actually stopped what she was doing. Good? He should be angry. Maybe if he's angry enough, he'll come home and actually be our father, instead of just someone who sends presents twice a year and acts like that's sufficient. Out of the mouths of children. Though Thomas was hardly a child anymore, he'd grown up faster than he should have, shaped by absence and necessity into someone who saw things clearly and said them plainly. "He's coming home next month," Lydia said. "Is he?" Thomas's skepticism was palpable. "Or is he saying he's coming home while making plans to delay?" "The letter said within the month." "The letter said a lot of things, I imagine. Whether he means any of them is different." Lydia had no response to that. Because Thomas was right. Rowan's letters had always been full of intentions that evaporated when tested against convenience. "We'll see," she said finally. Thomas nodded. "We will." He left her with that simple statement hanging in the air. Not hope, not expectation, just observation. They would see. And if Rowan failed to appear again, they would adapt. They always did. The fourth week brought silence. No letters from Rowan, no further communications from his allies or his mother. The quiet felt ominous, like the stillness before thunder. Lydia used the time to prepare. If Rowan was actually coming home, and that was still a significant if, she needed the estate running so efficiently that he couldn't find fault. Needed every ledger balanced, every tenant satisfied, every repair completed or scheduled. needed visible, undeniable proof that she'd been doing everything he claimed credit for. She worked 14-hour days inspecting property, reviewing accounts, meeting with tenants. The children barely saw her except at meals. Miss Brennan handled their lessons. Cook handled their emotional needs. Lydia handled everything else. On the first day of the 5th week, a different courier arrived. Not one of the usual messengers, but a man in Rowan's personal livery, riding a horse too expensive for routine correspondence. He handed Lydia a sealed envelope, bowed stiffly, and waited. She opened it there on the front steps, in full view of the household staff who'd gathered to watch. Lydia, I arrive tomorrow. Prepare the house accordingly. R. 4 sentences, not even a full signature, just an initial, as if he couldn't be bothered to write his own name for his own wife. Lydia folded the letter, looked at the courier. Tell the Duke that the house is always prepared. We maintain standards here regardless of who is or isn't in residence. The courier blinked, clearly unused to responses that needed delivering. Your Grace, I'm only instructed to— Tell him, Lydia repeated, word for word. The man bowed again, uncertain, and rode off. Behind her she heard Cook's small noise of approval, saw Thomas watching from an upper window, felt the weight of what she'd just done settling over her like armor clicking into place. Tomorrow. Rowan was actually coming home tomorrow. She'd planned for this, prepared for it. But standing there on the steps with the winter wind cutting through her shawl, she felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger, but a cold, calm readiness. Let him come. Let him see what she'd built without him. Let him try to dismiss it or diminish it or claim it as his own. She'd made sure that was impossible now. The truth was out, documented, distributed, known. All that remained was making him face it. She turned and walked back inside, already mentally organizing the next day. The children would need to be presentable, but not performative. The staff would maintain their normal routines. Dinner would be simple, well-prepared, nothing fancy. No special treatment, no performance. Just reality. The reality Rowan had been avoiding for 6 years. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in her study with the fire burning low, reviewing ledgers one final time, making sure every number was correct, every decision justified, every penny accounted for. At some point past midnight, Thomas appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I couldn't. He came in without asking permission and sat in the chair opposite her desk. Are you nervous? No. Liar. Lydia looked up. Thomas met her gaze steadily. When had he learned to see through her? When had her armor become transparent to him? Perhaps a little, she admitted. What if he's angry? He is angry. The letter made that clear. What if he tries to punish you for the letters you sent? Punish me how? Take away my responsibilities? Send me away? She gestured at the study, the ledgers, the evidence of 6 years' work. This estate functions because I make it function. He can't punish me without punishing himself. Thomas considered this. What if he doesn't see it that way? Then I'll make him see it. And if he still doesn't? The question was the one Lydia had been avoiding. What if Rowan came home, saw everything, understood everything, and still chose himself? Still chose his political life, his capital existence, his Catherine Delacroix, and whatever she represented? What if the truth didn't matter because he simply didn't care? Then I'll know, Lydia said quietly, and knowing is better than wondering. Thomas nodded slowly. You're braver than me. You're 9 years old. You're not supposed to be brave yet. I think I am, though. Or trying to be. He picked at a loose thread on his nightshirt. I heard you tell Clara that Father was coming home. She's been talking about it non-stop, making him a welcome home card, planning what to say to him. That's natural. It's going to break her heart when he leaves again. You don't know that he will, don't I? Thomas looked up. Be honest, Mother. Do you actually think he's going to stay? The question deserved honesty. Thomas had earned that. No, Lydia said. I don't. Then why let Clara hope? Because hope is different for her than it is for you. You protect yourself by expecting nothing. She protects herself by expecting everything. Neither approach is wrong. But one of us is going to be right. Yes. Thomas stood, walked to the door, paused. Mother, when he does leave again, will you be all right? The question came from such a deep well of worry that Lydia felt something crack in her chest. Her son, 9 years old, worried about her. "I'll be fine," she said. "I always am." "That's not the same as all right." "No," Lydia agreed. "It isn't, but it's what we have." Thomas left without another word. Lydia sat alone with her ledgers and her truths and the knowledge that tomorrow everything would change, or nothing would. Both possibilities felt equally likely and equally devastating. She worked until dawn, then dressed carefully in a simple gray wool dress that was practical, well-made, and utterly without adornment. She braided her hair tightly, pinned it in place, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw exactly what she'd become, a woman built for function, not display. Good. Let Rowan see what his absence had created. The household rose with its normal rhythm. Breakfast, chores, lessons. Lydia maintained the routine because routine was what protected them, what gave the children structure when everything else was uncertain. Clara could barely sit still. She'd made 3 welcome home cards before finally settling on one that featured a crayon drawing of the family standing in front of the house. 4 figures, all present, all together. The lie of it hurt to look at. "Do you think he'll like it?" Claire asked, holding it up for inspection. "I'm sure he will." "Should I make another one?" "This one has a smudge." "It's perfect, Clara." "But what if—" "It's perfect." Clara subsided, clutching the card. Thomas sat across from her, eating methodically, saying nothing. He'd made no card, no preparation. He was simply waiting, armored in low expectations. Lydia envied him that, wished she could do the same. The hours crawled. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. No rider appeared. No carriage arrived. By dinner time, Clara's excitement had soured into anxious watching out the window. Thomas remained quiet, vindicated, but taking no pleasure in it. Lydia set the table for 4 anyway, because removing the 4th plate felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. They ate in silence. Clara pushed food around her plate. Thomas ate everything, the way he always did, practical even in disappointment. Lydia was clearing the dishes when she heard it. Hoofbeats. A carriage. The crunch of wheels on frozen ground. Clara bolted from the table. "He's here! Mother, he's here!" She ran for the door. Thomas followed more slowly. Lydia stayed where she was, hands gripping the edge of the table, breathing carefully. The front door opened, closed. Voices in the hall, then footsteps. Coming closer. Rowan appeared in the doorway, and Lydia's first thought was how much he looked like a stranger. 6 years hadn't changed him physically. He was still tall, still handsome in the polished way that suggested more time spent being looked at than doing actual work. But there was something different in his posture, in the way he held himself. He looked cornered. "Lydia," he said. His voice was careful, controlled. "Rowan." They stood there, husband and wife, staring at each other across 6 years of distance that no amount of proximity could close. Clara pushed past him, holding out her card. "Father, look what I made you. It's our family, see? That's you, and that's Mother, and that's me, and that's Thomas, and—" "Very nice, Clara." He took the card without really looking at it. His eyes stayed on Lydia. "Might I have a word with your mother, privately?" Clara's smile dimmed. "But I wanted to show you—" "Later, Clara." Thomas took his sister's hand. "Come on, let's go." "But now." Thomas led her away, and Lydia felt a surge of gratitude for her son's protective instincts. He'd spare Clara the worst of this, whatever this was about to become. The door closed. Lydia and Rowan stood alone in the dining room with the dishes half cleared and the evidence of a family meal he hadn't been part of. "Well," Rowan said finally, "are you satisfied?" Lydia met his gaze. "No, but I'm getting there." And in the terrible silence that followed, she watched her husband realize that the woman he'd married no longer existed, and the woman who remained was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined possible. Rowan's jaw tightened. He moved into the room with the deliberate control of a man trying very hard not to lose his temper in front of witnesses who might still be listening. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I wrote a letter, several, actually." "You've made me a laughingstock." Lydia began stacking the plates with methodical precision. "I documented facts. If those facts embarrass you, perhaps you should examine the facts, not my decision to share them." "Share them?" His voice climbed. You broadcasted our private affairs to half the capital's elite. Pemberton won't look me in the eye. Lady Huxley is hosting entire evenings dedicated to discussing my absent husbandry. Do you understand what that does to a man's political standing? Do you understand what 6 years of actual absent husbandry does to a family? The words landed like a slap. Rowan went very still. Lydia continued clearing the table, moving around him as if he were furniture. Dinner is over. The children have eaten. If you're hungry, I can have cook prepare a plate. I didn't come here to eat. No, you came here to be angry at me for telling the truth. She set the dishes on the sideboard. How novel. I've spent 6 years waiting for you to come home for any reason at all. Lydia, your room is prepared. Same one you used last time. I assume you remember where it is. I'm not staying in a separate room. This is absurd. She turned to face him fully. Is it? We've been living separate lives for years. I'm simply making the sleeping arrangements match the reality. His hands clenched, unclenched. I won't be shut out of my own home. Then perhaps you shouldn't have stayed away from it for 6 years. I was serving the family's interests in the capital. No. Lydia's voice was flat, final. You were serving your interests. The family's interests have been served here. By me. Alone. Rowan stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. You truly believe you can speak to me this way? I can speak to you however I choose. You forfeited the right to courtesy through your prolonged absence and consistent neglect. I am still your husband, the Duke. This estate, these children, you, all of it falls under my authority. Does it? Lydia pulled out the chair at the head of the table, his chair, traditionally, and sat in it. Then, by all means, exercise that authority. Explain to the 43 tenant families why you're revoking the rent relief I granted. Tell the blacksmith why the equipment repairs I approved need reconsideration. Justify to the children why their father knows less about their daily lives than the scullery maid does. She leaned back, hands folded in her lap, expression neutral. Go ahead. Be the Duke. I'm fascinated to see how you'll manage it without me. The color rose in Rowan's face. You've overstepped. Badly. I've stepped exactly where you left a void for 6 years. You had no right to— I had every right. The words came out sharp, louder than she'd intended. Lydia caught herself, lowered her voice. I had the right of a wife left to manage everything while her husband pursued political theater and whatever else occupies his time in the capital. I had the right of a mother raising children who barely recognize their own father. I had the right of a woman who's been invisible for so long she decided visibility was worth the cost. Rowan pulled out a chair, not the head of the table, but one to the side, and sat heavily. He looked tired suddenly, older. Catherine sent you that letter, didn't she? It wasn't a question. Yes. What did it say? Does it matter? It matters because Catherine is— He stopped, reconsidered. She's vindictive. Whatever she wrote was designed to cause harm. She wrote the truth, that you speak of me sometimes when guilt catches you, but that it passes. Lydia watched him absorb this. Does it pass, Rowan? The guilt? He looked away. Catherine is not what you think. I haven't thought about Catherine at all. I've thought about you, about what kind of man shares his marriage struggles with another woman rather than addressing them with his wife. We're not— He dragged a hand through his hair. It's complicated. It's simple. You chose her company over mine, her understanding over mine, her presence over mine. Those are choices, Rowan. Own them. You make it sound sordid. I make it sound exactly like what it is. Silence fell between them. Outside, Lydia could hear the evening sounds of the estate settling, horses being stabled, servants finishing their work, the ordinary rhythms of a place that functioned whether its Duke was present or not. Finally, Rowan spoke. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you anymore. That's the point. Then why the letters? Why the public humiliation if not to force my hand? Lydia stood, began collecting the remaining dishes. I didn't write them to force your hand. I wrote them because I was tired of being invisible. Tired of you taking credit for work you never did. Tired of watching our children grow up wondering if they even have a father who cares? Of course I care. Caring requires presence. You've given us your name, your money, your genetic legacy, but you haven't given us you. And I'm done pretending that's sufficient." She carried the dishes toward the kitchen. Rowan stood abruptly, blocking her path. "Move," she said. "We're not finished talking." "Yes, we are. You wanted to know what I want? I want you to see what you've been blind to for 6 years. I want you to understand what it costs to run this place, raise these children, maintain everything you take for granted. I want you to stop treating your family like an inconvenient obligation you can manage from 200 miles away." And the letters accomplish that how? They make it impossible for you to ignore the reality. Every person you work with, socialize with, depend on, they all know now. They know what kind of husband and father you actually are versus what you claim to be. You can't perform your way out of this one. Rowan's expression darkened. "So this is revenge." "No, this is consequences." Lydia pushed past him. "Now move. I have work to finish before bed." She left him standing in the dining room and didn't look back. Her hands were shaking from anger or adrenaline or 6 years of compressed fury finally finding release. She couldn't tell. But she kept moving. Into the kitchen, setting down the dishes, thanking Cook, who looked worried but wise enough to stay silent. Then up the stairs to check on the children. Clara's room first. The girl was in bed, still dressed, curled around the welcome home card that Rowan had barely glanced at. She wasn't sleeping, just lying there, small and still. "Clara?" He didn't like it. Her voice was muffled by the pillow. He was distracted. It's a beautiful card. He didn't even look at it properly. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed. "I know." "Is he leaving again?" "I don't know, but probably." Clara rolled over to face her mother. Her eyes were dry but red-rimmed, as if she'd been holding back tears through sheer force of will. "Thomas said he would. Thomas is always right about these things. Thomas is protective of you. Sometimes that makes him pessimistic." "Pessimistic means expecting bad things, right?" "Yes." "Then maybe pessimistic is just being honest." Clara pulled the card close to her chest. "I made it perfect. I drew everyone together. I thought if he saw us all together, he'd want to stay." The simple logic of it, the childish hope that a crayon drawing could fix what 6 years of absence had broken, made Lydia's throat tight. "It doesn't work that way, sweetheart." "I know." Clara's voice was very small. "But I wanted it to." Lydia smoothed her daughter's hair, the same color as her own, the same texture. "Sleep now. Tomorrow will be easier." "Will it?" "Probably not, but we'll face it anyway." Clara managed a weak smile. "That's very pessimistic, Mother. Or just honest." She kissed Clara's forehead and left before the tears she'd been suppressing could fall where her daughter might see them. Thomas's room was dark. She almost left him alone, assuming he was asleep, but then she heard his voice from the shadows. "Is he still here?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know." Thomas sat up. She could just make out his outline in the dim light from the hallway. "Did you fight?" "We had a conversation." "That's not an answer." "Yes, we fought." "About the letters?" "Among other things." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Good." "Why is that good?" "Because fighting means you're not just accepting things anymore. You're making him see what he's done." "That's good." He paused. "Isn't it?" Lydia sat on the edge of his bed, mirroring what she'd done with Clara. But Thomas was different, older, required different truths. "It's necessary. Whether it's good remains to be seen." "Are you afraid?" The question surprised her. "Of what?" "That he'll take everything away. The estate. Us. Your authority to make decisions." Thomas's voice was steady, but she could hear the worry underneath. "He could do that, couldn't he? Men have all the legal power. You told me that once when I asked why you couldn't just divorce him." She had told him that, during one of their practical lessons about how the world worked. Thomas absorbed information like a sponge and forgot nothing. "He could try," Lydia said carefully, "but taking everything away would require him to actually manage it, which he can't do. He doesn't know how." "What if he learns?" "Then I'll deal with that when it happens." "You always say that. I'll deal with it, like nothing scares you." "Everything scares me, Thomas. I've just learned that fear is useless unless it drives action." He considered this. "So what action are you taking?" "I'm making him see. Really see." What this place requires. What you and Clara need. What I've been doing all along. She touched his shoulder. And if he still chooses to leave after that, at least we'll know for certain. Know what? That we're better off without him. The words hung in the air between them, brutal and honest. Thomas nodded slowly. Yeah, we probably are. Sleep now. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Mother? He caught her hand as she stood. Thank you. For what? For not lying to us anymore. About him. About any of it. Lydia squeezed his hand once, then left before the pressure in her chest could crack into something messier than tears. She went to her own room, not the master bedroom she'd once shared with Rowan, but the smaller chamber she'd claimed 3 years ago when his visits became so rare that maintaining the fiction of a shared bed felt ridiculous. The space was simple, functional. A bed, a desk, a wardrobe. Everything she needed, nothing she didn't. She undressed mechanically, the motions automatic. But her mind was racing, replaying the conversation with Rowan, dissecting every word, every expression, looking for cracks in his armor or confirmation that he had none. A knock on the door startled her. Lydia, Rowan's voice. She should have expected this, should have locked the door. Go away. We need to finish our conversation. No, we don't. Please. The word was so unexpected that she actually opened the door. Rowan stood there in shirt sleeves, the formal jacket abandoned, looking more disheveled than she'd seen him in years. May I come in? No? Lydia, whatever you need to say can be said from the hallway. He glanced both ways, checking for servants, then lowered his voice. I'm trying to understand what you want, what this is all about. I've already told you. You've told me I'm a terrible husband and father. You've told me I'm absent and neglectful. You've told me I take credit for work I don't do. What you haven't told me is what would satisfy you. Lydia leaned against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted. I don't think you're capable of understanding what would satisfy me. Try me. All right. She crossed her arms. I want you to spend 1 week, just one, managing this estate exactly as I do. No delegation, no shortcuts, every decision, every crisis, every tenant dispute and broken fence and sick animal and sleepless night when one of the children has a fever. I want you to do it alone, the way I've done it for 6 years, and then tell me it's not difficult. Tell me it doesn't matter. Tell me any person with half a brain could manage it. Rowan frowned. That's absurd. I have political responsibilities, which you'll abandon for 1 week, to prove that you actually understand what your family requires. I can't simply leave the capital for, you've left your family for 6 years. Surely you can spare 7 days. It's not the same thing. No, Lydia agreed. It's not. But it's what I'm asking. 1 week of your life devoted entirely to being present here, fully present, making every decision, handling every problem, being the duke of this estate instead of just claiming the title. And if I refuse? She shrugged. Then you prove my point, that you're incapable of doing what I do, that your authority is theoretical rather than practical, that everything you've taken credit for belongs to me. You can't possibly manage without me. The statement was so absurd she almost laughed. Rowan, I've been managing without you for 6 years. That's the entire problem. He opened his mouth, closed it. Whatever argument he'd been preparing died unspoken. 1 week, Lydia repeated. That's my offer. Take it or don't. But if you don't, I'll write another letter. And this one will be addressed to the Parliamentary Ethics Committee, detailing how you've been claiming family man values while abandoning your actual family. You wouldn't. I absolutely would. I have nothing left to lose. You've already taken everything that mattered. Your presence, your partnership, your attention. What's left? Your reputation? I've already damaged that. Your political career? That only matters if you care more about it than us. She stepped back, hand on the door. 1 week, Rowan, starting tomorrow. Show me you can do what I do. Or admit you can't, and we'll discuss what comes next. And what does come next? If I fail your little test, then you stop pretending you're the head of this family and start acknowledging who actually holds it together. She closed the door in his face and locked it this time. Behind the door, she heard him stand there for a long moment, heard his breathing, heard the floorboard creak as he shifted his weight. Then footsteps retreating down the hall. Lydia sat on the edge of her bed and let the shaking start. Not fear, not anger, something more complicated. The feeling of standing at a precipice and jumping before you could talk yourself out of it. She'd just gambled everything on Rowan's inability to manage what she'd been managing alone. If he succeeded, if he proved competent, capable, able to handle the estate's demands, she'd lose whatever leverage she had. But if he failed, everyone would see it, not just her, not just the children, but Rowan himself. The gap between his self-perception and reality would become impossible to ignore. That was the real goal. Not revenge, not humiliation, just truth. Undeniable, unavoidable, laid bare in the harsh light of actual experience. She barely slept. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Floorboards creaking, wind against windows, the distant sound of servants beginning their pre-dawn routines. By the time real morning arrived, Lydia had been awake for hours, dressed and ready, armored once again in practicality. She found Rowan in the dining room, looking haggard over a cup of coffee. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." Guilt or anger? Both. He set down the cup. "I've been thinking about your proposal." "And?" "1 week. I'll do it." He straightened as if the decision restored some of his usual confidence. "But when I succeed, you'll acknowledge it, publicly, the same way you publicly cataloged my failures. If you succeed, I'll acknowledge it." "When, not if." Lydia poured herself coffee, using the motion to hide her expression. "We'll see. What do I do first?" She pulled a leather journal from her pocket, the same one she used daily to track tasks, decisions, problems. She set it on the table between them. "Read that, all of it. That's yesterday. 1 day's worth of decisions and actions required to keep this estate running." Rowan opened it. She watched his eyes move down the first page, then the second, the third. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something approaching alarm. You do all this? In 1 day? Sometimes more. Yesterday was average. But he flipped pages. "There must be 30 items here, 40. 42! I didn't finish the last 2 before bed. They're waiting for this morning." He looked up at her. "How?" "Practice. Necessity. 6 years of having no choice." Rowan closed the journal carefully, as if it might bite him. "Where do I start?" "The same place I do. Morning inspection, livestock, grain stores, property damage from overnight. Then tenant meetings. The Thorntons are behind on rent and need an extension conversation. The blacksmith needs approval for equipment purchases. The Miller family's youngest has a fever and may need the doctor, which means reviewing our medical fund allocation." She pulled out a second journal, this one empty, and set it beside the first. "Document everything, every decision, every problem, every solution. At the end of the week, we'll review it together." "You're serious about this?" "Completely." "And you won't help? At all?" "I'll be available to answer questions, but the decisions are yours. The work is yours. The failures are yours." She sipped her coffee. "Welcome to my life, Rowan. Try not to destroy it in 7 days." She left him sitting there, staring at the journals as if they were written in a foreign language. The satisfaction should have been sweeter. Instead, it tasted like ashes and inevitability. By mid-morning, she could hear him arguing with the estate manager about grain inventory. By noon, he'd gotten lost trying to find the north pasture and had to ask a stable boy for directions. By early afternoon, she watched from her study window as he stood in the middle of a tenant dispute about property boundaries, looking increasingly desperate as both parties talked over each other. Thomas appeared beside her at the window. "He's terrible at this." "He's learning. He's failing. Same thing sometimes." They watched as Rowan attempted to assert authority over the boundary dispute, and both tenants simply ignored him, continuing their argument as if the Duke wasn't even present. "Mother?" Thomas's voice was quiet. "What happens if he can't do it? Really can't? Not just for a week, but at all?" "Then we'll have proof of what I've been saying, that this estate runs because of me, not him." "And then what?" "Then he has to choose. Accept that reality and adapt, or leave and let us continue without him." "You'd really let him leave? Permanently?" Lydia watched Rowan finally give up on the boundary dispute and walk away, shoulders tight with frustration. "If he chooses to leave, I'm not letting him do anything. He'll have made his choice. I'll simply stop pretending it's anything other than what it is." Thomas absorbed this silently. Then, "I hope he fails." "Thomas, I do. I hope he fails completely. So he knows, so he really understands what you've been doing, what we've been living with. He looked up at his mother. Is that wrong? Lydia pulled him close, this boy who'd grown up too fast in a household starved of its father. No, sweetheart. That's just honest. By evening, Rowan looked like he'd aged 5 years. He sat at dinner barely touching his food, making notes in the journal with increasingly desperate scribbles. How was your day? Lydia asked, tone carefully neutral. The Thorntons are impossible. The blacksmith's pricing seems inflated, but I don't know enough to argue. The Miller child needs the doctor, but our medical fund is lower than I expected, and I don't know if that's mismanagement or normal expenditure. It's normal. I had to use extra funds last month when the Carson family had their barn fire and needed immediate medical care for burns. Rowan looked up. That's not in any report. It's in my personal journal, the one you're currently reading. It's not detailed in the estate ledgers. Because it was emergency spending from discretionary funds. If I logged every crisis expenditure in the formal ledgers, the books would be incomprehensible. He stared at her. How do you track it all? Memory? Experience? The ability to make decisions quickly when necessary and defend them later if questioned. That's not a system. That's chaos. That's survival. Lydia cut her meat with precise movements. Welcome to Frontier Estate Management, Rowan. It's not the organized political theater you're used to. It's messy, immediate, and unforgiving of hesitation. Clara, who'd been silently pushing peas around her plate, spoke up. Father, did you fix the fence? Rowan blinked. What fence? The north fence. Mother said it needed fixing. Did you fix it? No. I didn't get to it yet. Why not? Because I was managing other things. But if the fence isn't fixed, the livestock will get out. Then they'll eat the crops or wander onto the road and cause accidents. Mother explained it all to me. Clara's tone was matter-of-fact, educational. You have to fix important things first, even if they're hard. The 7-year-old's rebuke landed harder than any of Lydia's calculated provocations. Rowan set down his fork. I'll handle the fence tomorrow. You should handle it tonight, Thomas said quietly. Before dark. That's what Mother would do. I'm not your mother. We know, Thomas said. That's the problem. The silence that followed could have cut glass. Rowan pushed back from the table. I need air. He left without excusing himself. The children looked at Lydia. Did we make him angry? Clara asked, worried. You told him the truth. That's different from making him angry, even if the result looks similar. But should we have said those things? Lydia considered lying, considered protecting Clara from the weight of what they were doing. But Thomas was right earlier. Honesty was what they needed now. All of them. Yes, she said. You should have. Your father needs to hear hard truths, especially from you. Because we're his children? Because you're the people most affected by his choices. You have the right to name what those choices have cost you. Clara nodded slowly, processing this. Mother? Do you think he'll stay after this week? I don't know, sweetheart. Do you want him to? The question caught Lydia off guard. Did she want Rowan to stay? The man who'd abandoned them, who'd taken credit for her work, who'd needed public humiliation to even notice his family existed? The honest answer was complicated, painful, not fit for children's ears. I want him to be the father you deserve, she said finally. Whether that requires staying or leaving, I don't know yet. Thomas met her eyes across the table. In his gaze, she saw understanding beyond his years. He knew what she wasn't saying, that sometimes loving someone meant letting them prove they were incapable of being what you needed. That sometimes the kindest thing was truth, even when truth destroyed everything. After dinner, Lydia found Rowan in the stables, staring at the north fence repair materials, as if they'd attacked him personally. You don't have to do this tonight, she said. Yes, I do. You would have. I would have delegated it to someone with fence building experience while I managed the 30 other tasks requiring attention. So I'm already failing your test. You're learning what the test actually involves. That's different. He picked up a hammer, set it down. I had no idea, truly. The scope of what you manage here. I thought... He stopped, started again. I thought you had help, staff, systems. I have staff. I am the system. That's not sustainable. It's been sustaining for 6 years. Rowan turned to face her fully. In the dim, stable light, he looked older, worn. "What do you want from me, Lydia? Really? I want you to answer a question honestly." "What question?" "If you could go back 6 years knowing what you know now about what staying here would require versus leaving for the capital, what would you choose?" He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. Finally, "I don't know." "That's your answer, then." Lydia turned to leave. "Wait." His hand caught her arm. "If I had known, if I had understood what you'd be carrying alone, I would have—" "You would have what? Made the same choice anyway because your political career mattered more? Or stayed here and resented me for the opportunity you gave up? That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Rowan. That's what I've been trying to make you see." She pulled her arm free and walked back toward the house, leaving him alone with his hammer and his choices and the fence that wouldn't fix itself no matter how long he stared at it. That night, lying in her bed listening to the sounds of Rowan attempting to repair fencing in the dark, Lydia felt the first cracks in her armor. Not regret, not sympathy, just exhaustion. The bone-deep kind that came from carrying weight too long with no relief in sight. She'd forced this confrontation, engineered it, pushed Rowan into a position where he had to face what he'd been avoiding. But facing it didn't mean he'd change. Didn't mean he'd stay. Didn't mean any of this would result in anything except confirmation that her marriage had been dead for years, and she'd been too stubborn to bury it. Tomorrow was day 2 of 7. Already, she could see him struggling, drowning. The question was whether watching him drown would satisfy the part of her that needed him to understand, or whether it would just leave her standing on the shore, alone as always, with nothing but the truth for company. Outside, the hammering stopped. A long silence. Then a crash, followed by cursing. Lydia closed her eyes and didn't go help him. Some lessons had to be learned in the dark. By morning, the north fence was worse than before. 3 new sections had collapsed under Rowan's amateur repairs, and 2 posts leaned at angles that suggested they'd fall by noon. Lydia stood surveying the damage with the estate manager, a grizzled man named Garrett who'd worked the land longer than she'd been alive. "Should I fix it, Your Grace?" Garrett asked, keeping his expression carefully neutral. "No. Leave it." "But the livestock will be rotated to the south pasture today. The Duke is learning a valuable lesson about the difference between attempting work and completing it." Garrett's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "As you say, Your Grace." She left him there and returned to the house, where Rowan was already at breakfast looking like he'd slept in his clothes. Which, based on the mud stains and wood splinters, he probably had. "The fence," he said without preamble. "It's worse." "I know. I made it worse trying to fix it." "Yes." "You're not going to help." "No." He stared at his coffee as if it contained answers. "What am I supposed to do?" "Figure it out. The same way I would have to if you weren't here, which is the same way I've been doing it for 6 years." Thomas entered, took one look at his father's disheveled state, and sat down without comment. Clara followed, stopping short when she saw Rowan. "Father, you have wood in your hair." Rowan reached up, pulled out a splinter. "I was working on the fence." "Did you finish it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't know how to build fences, Clara." "Then why were you trying to do it yourself? Mother always says if you don't know how to do something, you find someone who does, and either learn from them or let them handle it." The casual delivery of his own wife's wisdom by his 7-year-old daughter made Rowan close his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked at Lydia. "Who builds fences here?" "Garrett, the estate manager you've walked past 17 times since arriving and never introduced yourself to. The old man with the 40 years of experience managing frontier properties." "Yes, that old man." Rowan stood abruptly. "Where is he?" "Probably at the north pasture, wondering why his Duke is too proud to ask for help." He left without finishing breakfast. Through the window, Lydia watched him stride toward the pastures with the kind of determined energy that suggested frustration poorly channeled. "He's really bad at this," Thomas observed, buttering his bread with methodical precision. "He's learning. He's failing. Learning often looks like failing until the lesson takes hold." Clara swung her feet under the table. "Mother, what happens if Father can't learn? What if he's just not good at this?" It was the same question Thomas had asked, the same question Lydia had been avoiding answering honestly because the honest answer was too complicated. Then we adapt, she said finally, the way we always have. Without him? If necessary. Clara processed this while cutting her eggs into precise squares. I think I'd be sad if he left again, but also maybe relieved. The admission was so startlingly mature that Lydia actually set down her fork. Why relieved? Because when he's here, I keep hoping he'll be different, that he'll want to play with me or ask about my lessons or notice things. But he doesn't. He just exists near us without really being with us. And that's harder than him just being gone. Beside her, Thomas had gone very still. Lydia looked at her children, these small people who'd learned to articulate wounds most adults couldn't name, and felt something shift in her chest. You're both very brave, she said quietly. We learned it from you, Thomas replied. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't trust her voice to deliver anything other than the tears she'd been suppressing for 6 years. The day progressed with the same chaotic rhythm that defined frontier estate management. A tenant dispute over water rights that required 3 hours of mediation. An unexpected grain shortage that meant renegotiating with suppliers. A letter from the regional magistrate Betrayal about tax assessments that needed immediate response. Lydia handled it all from her study, documenting each decision in her own journal while leaving Rowan to manage the physical property challenges. By mid-afternoon, she watched through the window as he attempted to wrangle escaped sheep back into their pen with Garrett's increasingly exasperated assistance. The sheep won. Rowan ended up in the mud. That evening, Lord Pemberton's secretary arrived unexpectedly. Lydia received him in the parlor, noting his careful expression and formal posture. Your Grace, Lord Pemberton has asked me to deliver a message personally rather than through written correspondence. I'm listening. The secretary shifted his weight. His lordship wishes to express his concern about the Duke's extended absence from the capital. There are votes requiring his presence, alliances that need maintaining. His political position is, frankly, suffering. Perhaps he should have considered that before neglecting his family for 6 years. His lordship understands the Duke's domestic situation has become complicated. However, he wishes to emphasize that the Duke's political career cannot sustain indefinite absence. Decisions must be made. Lydia studied the secretary's face. Young, ambitious, uncomfortable with this assignment but committed to executing it professionally. Tell Lord Pemberton that the Duke is currently learning what domestic situation actually means. When he's completed his education, he'll make his own decisions about where his priorities lie. Not before. Your Grace, with respect, his lordship believes, I don't care what his lordship believes. My husband has spent 6 years prioritizing Lord Pemberton's political agenda over his own children. That ends now. Whether his career survives the adjustment is not my concern. The secretary's eyes widened slightly. Shall I convey that message verbatim? Please do. And tell his lordship that if he wishes to discuss this further, he's welcome to visit the estate personally and observe what the Duke is attempting to manage. Perhaps it will enlighten him about the actual cost of political ambition. The secretary left looking shaken. Lydia returned to her study and added the interaction to her journal with grim satisfaction. That evening brought the first real breaking point. Rowan appeared at dinner covered in mud, sheep wool, and what looked like barn debris. He collapsed into his chair without bothering to clean up first. I can't do this, he said flatly. The children stopped eating. Lydia set down her knife carefully. Can't or won't? Can't. I've tried. I've genuinely tried. But I don't have the knowledge, the experience, the instinct for it. Everything I touch turns into disaster. That's day 3 of learning something you've avoided for 6 years. Did you expect mastery? I expected basic competence. His voice rose. I'm not incompetent, Lydia. I've managed complex political negotiations, balanced competing interests, built coalitions that required years of careful relationship management. I'm not stupid. I never said you were stupid. I said you were absent. There's a difference. Then teach me. Instead of watching me fail, actually help me understand how to do this. Lydia stood, walked to the window. Outside, the estate spread in the gathering dark. Fields, pastures, buildings, the small village that depended on it all functioning properly. Her domain. the one she'd built from necessity while Rowan built his career on the fiction that he was managing it. "I can't teach you 6 years of experience in 1 week," she said without turning. "That's the point, Rowan. This doesn't happen through instruction. It happens through daily presence, through making 1,000 small decisions that compound into competence, through being here when crises happen and learning to handle them because there's no one else to do it. So I'm just supposed to fail for 6 years until I figure it out? No. You're supposed to recognize that what I've been doing isn't easy or simple or something anyone could do, that it required sacrifice and learning and constant adaptation, that you've been taking credit for work you couldn't replicate even with genuine effort." She turned to face him. "That's the lesson, Rowan. Not how to build a fence or negotiate with tenants, but understanding that your wife has been carrying weight you didn't even know existed, and that maybe, just maybe, she deserves acknowledgement for that." Silence filled the room. The children watched their parents with wide eyes, sensing something important happening but not quite understanding the full scope. Finally, Clara spoke. "Father, are you going to leave again?" Rowan looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since arriving, saw the hope and fear warring in her small face, saw the card she'd made him, now crumpled and abandoned on the sideboard, saw the evidence of what his absence had cost. "I don't know, sweetheart." That's what Mother always says when the answer is probably yes, but she doesn't want to make us sad. The observation landed like a stone. Rowan flinched. Thomas pushed his plate away. "May we be excused?" "Yes," Lydia said quietly. The children fled. Their footsteps echoed up the stairs, followed by the sound of Clara's door closing. Then Thomas's. Lydia and Rowan sat alone in the dining room with the ruins of a family meal between them. "They've learned to expect nothing from me," Rowan said finally. "That's what I've taught them. That their father is someone who appears briefly, makes promises he doesn't keep, and then vanishes again." "Yes. And you've taught them to survive without me." "I've taught them to survive, period. Whether you're here or not became irrelevant years ago." He stood, began pacing. "Pemberton's secretary came today, didn't he? I saw the horses." "Yes." "What did he want?" "Your presence in the capital. Apparently your political career is suffering from this extended absence." "What did you tell him?" "That you're learning what you should have learned 6 years ago. That your priorities are being recalibrated whether your career survives it or not." Rowan stopped pacing. "You're sabotaging everything I've built." "No, I'm forcing you to see what you've neglected while building it. There's a difference. The outcome is the same. I lose my political position, my influence, everything I've worked toward." Lydia stood, faced him across the table. "And I've lost 6 years of partnership, 6 years of not being alone, 6 years of my children knowing their father. But somehow my losses don't count as much as yours, do they?" "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair, Rowan. That's what I keep trying to make you understand. You chose your career. I didn't choose to be abandoned. I didn't choose to raise our children alone. I didn't choose to manage everything while you took credit and played statesman. Those choices were made for me by your absence. So what do you want?" "Really? Because I can't read your mind, and I can't fix 6 years of mistakes in 1 week, and I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't be what you need if you won't tell me what that is." The question hung between them, raw and desperate. Lydia had prepared for anger, for defensiveness, for justification and excuse-making. She hadn't prepared for this, for Rowan actually breaking, actually asking. "I want you to choose," she said quietly. "Not because I'm forcing you, not because your career is suffering, not because you're embarrassed by what people know, but because you actually want to be here, with us, because you've decided that being our husband and father matters more than being Lord Pemberton's political puppet. And if I can't make that choice, if I don't know how to be what you need, then you leave, and you stop pretending. You stop sending presents and writing empty letters and making brief appearances that do more damage than good. You make a clean break and let us move forward without the constant hope and disappointment cycle." Rowan stared at her. "You'd prefer I just disappear?" "I'd prefer honesty, whichever form that takes." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Garrett appeared, looking apologetic. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but we have a situation. The Miller child's fever has worsened. The doctor is saying it might be pneumonia. They're asking if you can authorize transport to the city hospital. It's expensive, but authorize it, Lydia said immediately. Whatever the cost, use the emergency medical fund. The fund is nearly depleted from last month's expenditures. Then use discretionary reserves. No one dies because we're worried about budget lines. Garrett nodded and left. Lydia was already moving, grabbing her coat. Where are you going? Rowan asked. To the Miller house. Their youngest is 6. The mother will be terrified. Someone needs to be there. It's late. It's dark. Yes, which is when crises happen. They don't wait for convenient daylight hours. She was halfway to the door when Rowan spoke again. Can I come with you? Lydia stopped, turned. Why? Because I should see this. How you handle these situations, what they actually require. She studied him, disheveled, exhausted, clearly out of his depth. But asking. Actually asking. Keep up, she said. I won't slow down for you. They rode to the Miller house in tense silence. The small cottage was lit from within, figures moving behind windows. When they arrived, Mrs. Miller was pacing outside, crying, while her husband tried to organize their other children. Your Grace! Mrs. Miller's relief was palpable. Thank you. Thank you. The doctor says she needs proper hospital care, but the cost is handled, Lydia said firmly. The transport is being arranged. You'll go with her, stay as long as necessary. Your family here will be looked after. We can't possibly repay. You've been good tenants for 8 years. You've never missed rent without reason. You maintain your property. You're part of this community. This is what community means. Mrs. Miller burst into fresh tears. Her husband gripped Lydia's hand with both of his, unable to speak. Lydia spent the next 2 hours organizing transport, supplies for the journey, someone to watch the other Miller children, messages to the city hospital, funds for immediate medical expenses. Rowan watched it all, silent, observing how Lydia moved through the crisis with practiced efficiency. When the transport finally left with Mrs. Miller and the sick child, Rowan and Lydia rode back in the dark. You do that often? Rowan asked. The medical interventions? When necessary. How often is necessary? 3 or 4 times a year, more during harsh winters. That's significant expense. That's the cost of being responsible for people who depend on you. They rode in silence for a while longer. Then, I would have hesitated about the expense. I would have wanted to check the ledgers, confirm we had the funds, maybe negotiate with the hospital for lower rates first. The child would have died while you negotiated. Yes. That's the difference between political maneuvering and actual crisis management. One allows for deliberation. The other demands immediate decision-making even when the information is incomplete. Rowan was quiet until they reached the stable. As they dismounted, he said, You've saved lives here, multiple lives, haven't you? I've made the decisions necessary to protect people I'm responsible for. Whether that counts as saving lives is perspective. It counts. His voice was rough. It absolutely counts. They walked back to the house together. At the door, Rowan paused. I'm going to finish this week, the full 7 days. Not because I think I'll suddenly become competent at estate management, but because I need to understand the full scope of what you do, what you've been doing. All right. And then I need to make some decisions, real ones. Lydia met his gaze. Yes, you do. The remaining days followed a pattern. Rowan attempted tasks, failed at most, succeeded at a few. Garrett and the other experienced staff members began offering guidance without being asked, perhaps taking pity on their Duke's obvious struggle. By day 6, Rowan had learned to delegate properly, had stopped trying to do everything himself, and started asking who was best equipped for each task. The estate didn't run perfectly, but it ran, barely. That evening, he sat in Lydia's study, his first time entering it since arriving, and stared at the walls lined with ledgers, journals, correspondence, maps, schedules. This is your command center, he said. Yes. How many hours a day do you spend here? 4 to 6, depending on the season and current challenges. And that's in addition to the physical inspections, the tenant meetings, the crisis management, the children's needs. Yes. He ran his hand over the desk surface, worn smooth from years of use. I couldn't do this, not long term. I'd go mad from the sheer volume of it. Or you'd adapt, the way I did. You shouldn't have had to adapt alone. The admission was quiet, simple, but it landed with the weight of 6 years behind it. Lydia felt something in her chest loosen fractionally. Not forgiveness, not trust, but recognition. He was finally seeing it, really seeing it. On the 7th day, Rowan called a household meeting. The full staff, the children, Lydia. Everyone gathered in the main hall with confused expressions and uncertain energy. Rowan stood at the front, looking nothing like the polished duke who'd arrived a week ago. He was thinner, more haggard, covered in bruises and cuts from various estate misadventures. But his posture had changed, less entitled, more uncertain. "I owe all of you an apology," he began, "particularly you." He looked at Lydia. "I've spent 6 years taking credit for work I didn't do, claiming authority I didn't earn, building a political career on the fiction that I was managing this estate when the truth is I abandoned it, abandoned all of you." The staff shifted uncomfortably. The children watched with wide eyes. "This week has been the hardest of my life, not because the work is impossible, but because it forced me to see how much I've failed, how much my wife has been carrying, how much my children have suffered from my absence, how much this entire community has functioned in spite of me rather than because of me." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "I can't undo 6 years. I can't give back the time I stole through neglect, but I can make a choice about what happens next." Lydia's heart was pounding. This was it, the moment that would define everything that followed. "I'm resigning my political position," Rowan said, "effective immediately. I'm withdrawing from the capital permanently. My place is here, with my family, on this estate. Learning to be the duke I should have been from the beginning." The room erupted. Staff members gasping, Thomas's mouth falling open, Clara making a small noise of surprise. Lydia stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. Rowan crossed to her, knelt, right there in front of everyone, on his knees before his wife. "I don't know if I can earn your forgiveness," he said. "I don't know if time and effort will be enough to repair what I've broken. But I'm asking for the chance to try. Not because you forced me, not because I've lost everything else, but because this week has shown me what matters. And you matter. Our children matter. This life matters more than any political career ever could." Lydia looked down at her husband, this man who'd been a stranger in her house, who'd taken her for granted, who'd needed complete humiliation to see what had been obvious for years. She should feel triumphant, vindicated, victorious. Instead, she felt exhausted and wary and uncertain. "Get up," she said quietly. He stood. "This doesn't fix everything. 1 week of struggle doesn't undo 6 years of absence. I know. The children barely know you. They've learned to expect nothing. Changing that will take years. I know. I don't trust you. I don't know if I can trust you again. I know." His voice was steady. "But I'm asking anyway, for the chance to prove that I can change, that I can be present, that I can be the partner you've needed and never had." Lydia looked past him at the assembled household, at Garrett, watching with cautious approval, at Cook, dabbing her eyes, at Thomas, who looked skeptical but hopeful, at Clara, who'd begun to cry quiet tears of confused relief, then back at Rowan. "You'll start tomorrow," she said. "Learning, really learning, not playing at estate management for a week, but committing to it. You'll work alongside Garrett, you'll attend every tenant meeting, you'll handle the midnight crises and the endless decisions and the constant weight of responsibility, and you'll do it while rebuilding relationships with children who've learned not to count on you." "I will. And if you fail, if you can't sustain this commitment, if you discover that presence is harder than performance and you retreat back to political comfort, then you'll have your answer, and I'll leave, permanently. No more false starts." She studied his face, looking for cracks in the sincerity, found only exhaustion and determination and something that might have been hope. "All right," she said finally, "we'll try." The room released its held breath. Clara ran to Rowan, threw her arms around him. He caught her, held her like she might disappear, and Lydia saw tears on his face for the first time in 6 years. Thomas approached more slowly, more carefully. But he came, extended his hand. Rowan took it, pulled his son into the embrace with Clara. Lydia watched her family, broken, tentatively healing, uncertain but trying, and felt the first stirrings of something she'd thought long dead. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever again, but possibility. The chance that presence might become partnership, that struggle might become understanding, that the man who'd needed complete humiliation to see his family might finally learn to value what he'd nearly destroyed. That night, after the household dispersed and the children finally slept, and the estate settled into its familiar nighttime rhythms, Rowan appeared at Lydia's study door. "May I?" he asked. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. He sat. They looked at each other across 6 years of distance and 1 week of forced proximity. "Thank you," he said, "for the chance. I won't waste it." "See that you don't." "Where do I start?" "Tomorrow. What should I focus on first?" Lydia pulled out a fresh journal, identical to the ones she used. Set it in front of him. "Start by observing. Learning names, understanding routines, building relationships with people who've learned to function without you. Don't try to take charge. Don't assert authority you haven't earned. Just be present and useful." "That's all?" "That's everything." She met his gaze. "Presence is the foundation, Rowan. Without it, nothing else matters. With it, eventually, trust might follow." He picked up the journal, held it like a sacred text. "I won't fail them again." "Won't fail you." "You might. Learning involves failure. But if you do fail, own it. Don't hide it or excuse it or blame circumstances. Just acknowledge it and try differently next time." "That's what you do when you fail?" "Yes." "And it works?" "Usually. Eventually." She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Nothing about this is easy, Rowan. If it were, you would have managed it from the capital." He laughed. Brief, bitter, but genuine. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Rowan stood. "Get some rest," Lydia said. "Tomorrow starts early. 5 a.m. Morning inspections wait for no one." "I'll be ready." He left. Lydia sat alone in her study, the room that had been her refuge and her fortress and her command center for 6 years. For the first time in all those years, she allowed herself to imagine sharing the burden, having a partner instead of being alone. The hope was fragile, tentative, easily destroyed by failure or backsliding or the 1,000 ways people proved they couldn't change. But it was there, a small flame in the darkness, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to build on. 5 a.m. came with the brutal insistence of frontier winters. Lydia woke to darkness and cold, dressed by candlelight, and made her way downstairs expecting to find the house silent and Rowan still asleep. Instead, she found him in the kitchen, fully dressed, drinking coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. "You're up," she said. "I said I would be." "Saying and doing are different things." "I'm learning that." He set down the cup. "What's first?" She studied him, rumpled but present, nervous but committed. "Livestock check, then grain stores, then we meet with Garrett about the spring planting schedule." "Lead the way." They worked through the morning in relative silence, Rowan shadowing her movements, asking questions when necessary, but mostly observing. He was clumsy with the physical tasks, slow to understand the systems, but he kept trying. When he made mistakes, he acknowledged them without excuse. By mid-morning, Lydia realized something had shifted. Not trust, not forgiveness, but a tentative working relationship built on shared presence rather than divided worlds. The children noticed, too. At lunch, Clara watched her father with cautious interest rather than desperate hope. "Father, did you really check on the sheep this morning?" "I did, with your mother and Garrett, who knew considerably more about it than I did." "Did you fall in the mud again?" "Twice, actually." Clara giggled. Thomas hid a smile behind his water glass. The days accumulated like snow, slowly, steadily, transforming the landscape one layer at a time. Rowan rose at 5 every morning, worked alongside Lydia and the staff, made decisions with increasing competence and decreasing arrogance. He failed regularly but failed forward, learning from mistakes rather than denying them. The children began to thaw. Clara started showing him her schoolwork without being asked. Thomas invited him to morning inspections, explaining systems with the patient precision of someone teaching a willing student. Lydia watched it all with careful neutrality, maintaining emotional distance while acknowledging practical progress. 3 weeks into Rowan's transformation, a letter arrived from Lord Pemberton. Lydia found Rowan reading it in the study that had once been hers alone and was becoming theirs. "He's threatening to withdraw all political support," Rowan said without looking up. "Says my resignation has damaged not just my career but his reputation by association. He's quite angry." "What will you do?" "Nothing." Rowan set the letter aside. "His anger is his problem. My family is mine. You don't regret it? Giving up everything you built?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I regret building it on a foundation of neglect. But the career itself? No. It was never as important as I convinced myself it was. It was just easier than being here, than doing the actual hard work of presence." Lydia sat across from him. "That's a convenient realization after you've already lost everything." "Is it? Or is it the truth I finally had to face because you forced the issue?" "I didn't force anything. I just stopped hiding the reality." "Same result." He met her gaze. "You broke through 6 years of willful blindness. I'm not going to pretend I arrived at this understanding independently. You made me see, and I'm grateful for that, even though the process was humiliating." "Humiliation was the point." "I know, and it worked." The admission settled between them, honest and uncomfortable. Outside, voices rose, urgent, multiple. Both Lydia and Rowan stood simultaneously, the shared instinct of people learning to respond together. Garrett burst through the door. "Your Graces, the Southfield drainage has failed. We've got flooding threatening the spring seed stores." Lydia was already moving. "How bad?" "Bad enough we'll lose everything if we don't divert the water in the next 2 hours." Rowan grabbed his coat. "What do we need?" "Every able body, shovels, sandbags, and speed." They rallied the household within minutes. Staff, tenant families, even the children old enough to help. The Southfield had become a muddy lake, water creeping toward the storage barns with patient inevitability. Lydia organized teams with practiced efficiency. "Garrett, take Group 1 to the drainage ditch. Start clearing the blockage." "Rowan, Group 2 builds the sandbag barrier between the water and the barns. I'll take Group 3 to start moving seed stores to higher ground in case we can't stop it." "Understood," Rowan said, already moving. They worked for 3 hours straight, digging, hauling, building. The water kept rising. The drainage blockage was worse than expected. Years of accumulated debris that should have been cleared seasonally, but had been missed in the chaos of maintaining everything else. Lydia worked alongside the tenants, hauling sandbags that made her shoulders scream. She was aware of Rowan across the field, equally filthy, directing his team with surprising competence. He'd learned something in the past weeks, how to work with people rather than above them. Thomas appeared at her side, struggling with a sandbag too heavy for his frame. "You should rest," Lydia said. "So should you." "I can't. Not until this is handled. Then neither can I." He set down the sandbag, already reaching for another. "We're in this together, right? That's what you always say." Lydia felt her throat tighten. "Right." By hour 4, the drainage was clearing. Water began flowing away from the barns, slow at first, then faster. The sandbag barrier held, the seed stores remained dry. When the immediate crisis passed, Lydia stood surveying the damage, the flooded field, the emergency repairs, the exhausted workers. It would take weeks to fully recover. But they'd saved the seeds, saved the spring planting, saved the year's harvest before it even began. Rowan approached, covered head to toe in mud. "We did it. This time." "You're never satisfied, are you?" "Satisfaction breeds complacency. Complacency breeds failure." He laughed, tired and genuine. "I'm beginning to understand why this place functions so well. You don't allow room for failure." "I allow room for failure. I just don't allow giving up." They walked back to the house together, the household trailing behind them. Lydia could feel the shift in energy, not just relief at averting disaster, but something else. Unity, maybe. The sense that they'd faced something together and won. That evening, after everyone had cleaned up and eaten, Garrett asked to speak with them privately. "I've been managing estates for 40 years, he said without preamble. "Worked for your father, Duke, and his father before him. I've seen good management and bad. Competent leadership and disasters waiting to happen." He looked between them. "What I've never seen is what's happening here now. A duke and duchess working as actual partners, making decisions together, both present, both committed, both willing to get in the mud when necessary. We're still learning, Rowan said. Everyone's always learning. The difference is whether you're learning together or separately. Garrett pulled out a ledger. I wanted to show you something, the estate's productivity over the past 6 years. He opened the book, pointed to a graph. The line climbed steadily upward. Yield increases, profit margins, tenant satisfaction rates. Her Grace did this, Garrett said bluntly. Alone. While you were playing politician, Duke, she was building something remarkable. This estate is twice as productive as it was under your father. Tenant retention is the highest in the region. We're profitable even in harsh years when our neighbors struggle. Rowan stared at the numbers. I had no idea. Because you weren't here to know, but you're here now. And if you stay, if you both keep working like you did today, this place could become something even more impressive. Garrett closed the ledger. That's all I wanted to say. Don't waste the opportunity you've been given. After Garrett left, Rowan sat heavily. Twice as productive as under my father. Your father was a drunk who gambled and ignored his responsibilities. The bar was not high. Still, you did this, built this. Yes. Why didn't you ever tell me? In letters? You could have documented the improvements, the successes. I did. You never responded to those letters. Only the ones about the children's health or immediate crises that required your theoretical approval. The truth of that landed visibly. I was so focused on what I thought mattered, political influence, social standing, building a legacy in the capital, that I completely missed the actual legacy being built here. Rowan's voice was rough. You could have left me, taken the children and gone somewhere you'd be appreciated. Where would I go? I had no independent wealth, no family willing to shelter a woman who abandoned her husband, regardless of cause. And this estate needed me. The people here needed me. Running away would have meant leaving them to suffer under neglect, even worse than what they already endured. So you stayed and fixed everything I broke. I stayed and built something worth preserving. There's a difference. Rowan stood, walked to the window overlooking the estate. I want to make this official, the partnership, not just in practice, but in legal documentation. What do you mean? I want to transfer joint authority over the estate to both of us, equal decision-making power, equal legal standing, so that if I ever fail again, if I ever slip back into old patterns, you have the authority to override me, to protect what you've built. Lydia stared at him. That's unusual. Most men haven't spent 6 years taking credit for their wife's work while she carried everything alone. I'm not most men, or rather I am, which is exactly the problem. But I'm trying to be better. This is how I prove it, by putting legal weight behind the commitment instead of just words. You'd really give up soul control? I never had soul control. That was the fiction I told myself. You've been running this place for years. I'm just acknowledging reality and making it official. The offer was staggering. Joint authority meant Lydia would have legal protection, independent power, the ability to make decisions without requiring his approval. It was the kind of arrangement women fought for and rarely won. I'll need to review the documents, she said carefully. Ensure the language is binding. Of course. I'll have the solicitor draft everything. You'll review and approve before I sign anything. This doesn't fix everything, Rowan. I know, but it's a start. The legal documents took 3 weeks to prepare. The solicitor, a traditional man who clearly disapproved of the arrangement, tried multiple times to convince Rowan to reconsider. It's highly irregular, Your Grace. Giving your wife equal authority undermines the natural order of— The natural order has failed spectacularly, Rowan interrupted. Draft the documents as requested, or I'll find a solicitor who will. The papers arrived for Lydia's review. She spent 2 days examining every clause, every provision, looking for loopholes or escape hatches. Found none. The documents were legitimate, binding, and exactly what Rowan had promised. She signed them in the study with Rowan and 2 witnesses present. The moment felt ceremonial, weightier than their actual wedding had been years ago. Now it's real, Rowan said as the ink dried. Now you can't easily undo it, Lydia corrected. That too. Word spread through the estate and beyond. Within a week, Lydia received letters from 3 other noble wives asking how she'd accomplished what they'd been fighting for unsuccessfully. She responded with careful honesty. I stopped asking permission and started documenting reality. Eventually, reality became impossible to ignore. 2 months into their new partnership, an unexpected visitor arrived. Catherine Delacroix, the woman whose letter had started everything. Lydia received her in the parlor with cool formality. Catherine was younger than expected, beautiful in the calculated way that suggested significant effort and visibly nervous. "I don't expect welcome," Catherine said without preamble, "but I owed you honesty about my motivations. Your letter was clear enough. My letter was cruel, designed to hurt you because I was angry at Rowan for choosing you. Eventually, always." Lydia waited. Catherine twisted her hands. "We were never lovers. Not physically, but emotionally? Yes. He confided in me, sought my company, made me believe I mattered to him in ways his wife didn't. You did matter to him. I'm not naive enough to deny that. But not enough. When faced with actual choice between political life with me as confidant or family life with you as partner, he chose you, and I couldn't accept that. So I wrote that letter hoping to destroy what remained of your marriage. It nearly worked, but not quite. Instead, it forced him to see what he was losing, and now he's here, fully present, committed." Catherine's smile was bitter. "I gave you the ammunition to save your marriage while trying to destroy it. The irony isn't lost on me." Lydia studied the woman who'd been a ghost in her marriage for years. Found not a villain, but someone equally damaged by Rowan's inability to commit fully to anyone. "He used you," Lydia said quietly. "The same way he used me. Took what he needed. Political connections from you, domestic management from me, without giving either of us the partnership we deserved." "Yes," Catherine's voice was barely audible. "We were both convenient. But we're both done being convenient now." Catherine nodded. "I'm leaving the capital, moving to my family's estate in the north, starting over somewhere he isn't. That's probably wise. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth, that my cruelty came from pain, not malice, and that inadvertently, I'm glad it led to this, to him finally seeing what he had." After Catherine left, Lydia sat alone in the parlor for a long time. The ghost had materialized, apologized, and departed. Another piece of the past laid to rest. Rowan found her there an hour later. Garrett said Catherine was here. She was. What did she want? To apologize, to explain, to say goodbye. Rowan sat beside her, careful not to crowd. "I owe you an apology too, for Catherine, for using her as emotional escape from the life I was avoiding. You've already apologized, multiple times. Not for this specifically. I let her believe she mattered more than she did. Led her on while telling myself I wasn't doing anything wrong because we weren't physical. But emotional betrayal is still betrayal. Yes, it is. I hurt multiple people through cowardice and selfishness. You, Catherine, our children. The list is long and shameful." Lydia turned to face him. "The question isn't what you did. We both know what you did. The question is what you're doing now to be different. I'm trying, every day. I know, I see it. Is it enough? Will it ever be enough?" She considered the question honestly. "I don't know. Trust takes time to rebuild. Maybe years. Maybe never fully. But effort matters. Consistency matters. And you're providing both. That's not exactly forgiveness. No, but it's acknowledgement, which is more than I could have given you 2 months ago." Spring arrived with the violent beauty of frontier thaws. Fields flooded, then drained. Green pushed through dead vegetation. The estate transformed from survival mode to growth mode. Lydia and Rowan worked the spring planting together. Not symbolically, but actually, in the fields, directing the work, making decisions jointly. The tenants watched this partnership with cautious approval, slowly accepting that their Duke had actually changed. Thomas turned 10. For his birthday, Rowan organized a full day of activities: morning riding, afternoon games, evening feast. He was clumsy with the arrangements, asking Lydia for help multiple times, but he tried. And Thomas, who'd learned to expect nothing, received presents instead of presents and treasured it more. Clara bloomed under her father's attention. She'd stopped making welcome home cards, but started sharing her days voluntarily, chattering through dinners about lessons and friends and small adventures. Rowan listened like it mattered, because it did. 6 months into their new life, Lydia woke to find Rowan already gone. She dressed quickly, concerned, and found him in the study reviewing ledgers. "You're up early even for you," she said. "I wanted to understand something. The years I was gone, you never hired additional help, never expanded the management staff. Why?" "I couldn't afford it without your approval, and you weren't here to approve anything. But the estate was profitable, increasingly so. You could have justified the expense." "Probably. But I'd learned not to make requests you'd ignore. It was easier to just handle everything myself." Rowan closed the ledger. "I want to hire 2 additional managers, one for tenant relations, one for agricultural operations, to take some of the burden off you." "That's not necessary." "It is necessary. You've been working yourself to exhaustion for 6 years. Now that I'm here, now that we're partners, the workload should be shared not just between us, but distributed to people qualified to help." "That's actually sensible." "I'm occasionally capable of sense." He smiled. "Will you help me find the right people?" "Yes." They hired carefully over the next month. A former estate manager from a neighboring property who'd been displaced when his employer died. A young agricultural specialist fresh from university with innovative ideas about crop rotation. The new hires integrated smoothly, and for the first time in years, Lydia felt the weight lift fractionally. Not gone. The responsibility was still ultimately theirs, but distributed. Manageable. She began sleeping better, eating more regularly, rediscovering small pleasures she'd forgotten existed, reading for enjoyment rather than information, taking walks without purpose, spending evenings with the children that didn't revolve around crises. One evening, she found herself laughing at something Rowan said during dinner. The sound surprised her, genuine amusement rather than polite acknowledgement. The children looked up, startled, then smiled. Later, after the children were in bed, Rowan found her in the study. "You laughed tonight." "I did. I'd forgotten what that sounded like." "So had I." He sat across from her. "Can I ask you something, honestly?" "Always." "Do you think you'll ever forgive me, fully? Or will this always be a partnership built on past wounds and present effort?" Lydia set down her pen. The question deserved real consideration. "I don't know," she said finally. "Forgiveness feels like erasing what happened, pretending it didn't matter. And it mattered enormously. It shaped who I became, who our children became. You can't undo that with presence and good intentions. So we're just working together despite the past? We're building something new on the foundation of hard lessons. That's different from forgiveness. Maybe better, in some ways, because it's honest about what we lost and what we're gaining. That's not very romantic. Romance is what got us here in the first place. I married you thinking love was enough. That mutual attraction and some shared interests meant partnership. We were both wrong. What do we have now then?" Lydia looked at him. This man who'd failed her catastrophically, but was genuinely trying to be better. "Respect, maybe. Shared purpose. A working relationship built on complementary skills and mutual commitment to our children and this estate." "That sounds sustainable," she finished, "which is more valuable than romance ever was." Rowan absorbed this quietly. "I'll take sustainable. It's more than I deserve." "Yes, it is." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd learned the hard way that partnership required presence, not performance. The commitment meant showing up every day, even when difficult, especially when difficult. A year after Rowan's return, the estate held its traditional harvest festival. The entire community gathered, tenants, staff, neighboring estates, local merchants. It was the first time Lydia had allowed herself to celebrate publicly since before Rowan left. She and Rowan stood together greeting guests, and people approached them as a unit rather than addressing Rowan while ignoring her. The shift was subtle but significant. Lord Pemberton appeared unexpectedly, looking older and considerably less influential than Lydia remembered. He approached cautiously. "Your Graces." "Lord Pemberton," Rowan said coolly, "I'm surprised to see you. I came to apologize for my role in encouraging your prolonged absence from your family, for prioritizing political maneuvering over human decency, for contributing to circumstances that nearly destroyed your marriage." The apology was stiff, formal, but seemingly genuine. I've been thinking about what drives men to sacrifice everything for political power, Pemberton continued, and I've concluded it's often emptiness, the pursuit of influence to fill voids we're afraid to acknowledge. You had the courage to step away. I'm still trapped in the game, but at least I can recognize it now. That's something, Rowan said. Pemberton turned to Lydia. Your Grace, I owe you specific apology. I dismissed your contributions as insignificant, encouraged your husband to view family as obligation rather than priority. I was wrong, catastrophically so. Lydia studied him, found not the political puppet master she'd imagined, but a tired man facing his own failures. Apology accepted, she said. Don't waste the insight. After Pemberton left, Rowan exhaled. That was unexpected. People can change when forced to confront reality. Speaking from experience? Obviously. They mingled through the festival, watching Thomas help organize games for younger children, while Clara performed a flute piece with surprising competence. The children had transformed over the year, more confident, more secure, more able to trust that their father would actually be present. As evening fell, Rowan found Lydia near the bonfire. Can we talk? Somewhere private? They walked to the edge of the gathering, far enough for privacy but close enough to monitor the celebration. I've been thinking, Rowan began, about what you said, that what we have is sustainable rather than romantic. Yes? I think you're wrong, or partially wrong. Lydia raised an eyebrow. Oh, I think what we have is both. Sustainable because it's built on mutual respect and shared work rather than fleeting attraction. But romantic in its own way. Because romance, real romance, isn't grand gestures and passionate declarations. It's choosing someone every day, showing up when it's hard, building something together that matters more than individual comfort. He took her hand carefully, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. I choose you, Lydia, not because I've lost everything else, not because you forced my hand, but because this life we're building, this messy, difficult, deeply imperfect partnership is the best thing I've ever been part of, and I want to keep choosing it, choosing you, every day. Lydia felt something shift in her chest, not the desperate hope of their early marriage or the bitter resignation of their middle years. Something new, something earned. I choose this too, she said quietly. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but forward, together. That's enough. That's everything. He pulled her close, and she let him. They stood together watching the celebration, their children, their community, their shared achievement, and for the first time in 6 years, Lydia felt the possibility of joy rather than just satisfaction. The moment was interrupted by Clara running up. Mother, Father, they're starting the dancing. You have to dance together. It's tradition. Rowan looked at Lydia. I don't remember the last time we danced. Our wedding. You stepped on my feet twice. I'll try to do better this time. They returned to the festival, joined the dancing. Rowan still wasn't particularly graceful, but he was present, fully present, committed to being there rather than performing being there. Thomas watched from the sidelines with approval. Clara clapped enthusiastically. The community observed with quiet satisfaction, their Duke and Duchess, finally acting like partners rather than strangers sharing a title. As the music played and the fire burned and the harvest celebration continued, Lydia felt something she'd thought permanently lost. Hope. Not the naive kind that ignored reality, but the harder, earned kind that acknowledged pain while believing in possibility. The estate had survived her 6 years alone, would thrive with both of them present. The children were healing. The community was stronger. The partnership was real. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was honest, functional, built on truth rather than performance. And that, finally, impossibly, was enough. Later, after the festival ended and the guests departed and the children finally slept exhausted and happy, Lydia and Rowan stood together on the steps of their house looking out over the estate they'd nearly lost and ultimately saved. What are you thinking? Rowan asked. That we're not finished building this. There's still work to do, always will be. But we'll do it together. Yes, together. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, allowing the comfort. The frontier wind blew cold, carrying the promise of winter ahead. But spring would follow. It always did. And they would face it the way they'd learned to face everything, present, committed, imperfect but trying. The house behind them held their sleeping children, safe, loved, secure in ways they hadn't been a year ago. The land stretched before them, demanding and unforgiving and theirs to protect. The future remained uncertain, full of challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in 6 years, they would face that future as partners. Not because it was easy, not because all was forgiven, but because they'd learned the hard way that presence mattered more than promises, and that the strongest foundations were built not from romance, but from the daily choice to show up and try. Lydia looked at the estate she'd built alone and would now maintain together, and felt not triumph, but something more valuable. Peace. The hard-won kind that came from surviving what should have destroyed you and emerging not perfect, but whole. "Come inside," Rowan said gently. "It's cold." "In a minute." She stood there a moment longer, breathing in the sharp air, memorizing the feeling of having carried impossible weight, and finally, setting some of it down. Then she turned and followed Rowan inside, to the home they'd broken, and were slowly, painfully, rebuilding into something that might actually last. The door closed behind them. The estate settled into night. And somewhere in the darkness, the future waited, uncertain, challenging, but no longer faced alone.